Well, something that Americans, particularly if they're not well traveled, don't think about. Although, I mean, African Americans do think about it. I'm sure you've seen very often when you talk about universal programs like universal healthcare. Black people will say, some will say, well, we can't have it because the country's racist and they're not going to want us to have it. So the poor white people are gonna deny it for themselves to make
Well,
sure we don't
I wrote a
we
whole
don't
think
have it.
piece about this kind of thing that was pretty close to that
And
article I wrote.
and so looking to the future, where you say, okay, well, are we going to be like England, where in the wake of no longer having to support this enormous empire, we turn our resources towards the public good? Maybe, maybe not. As an American, you really grow up in a very unique situation where your country is not tied to an ethnic heritage, right? You go to France, they're French. I mean, not everybody, but the nation is this French nation of people who have occupied that
Sure.
land for many millennia, and they still constitute the vast majority of people living in those countries, in those European countries, or any country around the world, Japan, China, anywhere you want to go, where we're really the only ones, other than Australia, Canada, who don't have that. And you know, does it really make it impossible for us to come together and take care of ourselves because we're so set against each other as a society that the whole idea of America as a unified nation has just been an ongoing experiment that has finally failed? I mean, has
Well,
America all along just been an open question of, can you have the concept of nationhood without it being tied to racial identity? Are we coming to a crossroads here where the answer seems to be no?
well, this is exactly the article that I wrote. I mean, it was just asking that exact question. But I would argue that it was designed this way. I mean, the country was founded by elites who didn't want to pay up to the elites in England. It was basically like the
Mhm.
mob. Like every once in a while in the mob, the capos get tired of paying up to the boss, and so they whack them, right? They're not supposed to whack them,
They're
but
not
they whack
supposed
them.
to. You can cause yourself
Right.
a lot of trouble that way.
Right. But sometimes they band together and they do it because they're tired of kicking up. That's how this
Mhm.
country was founded. That's who the founding fathers were. They were capos, tired of kicking up to the boss. And they realized that, hey, if we build this sort of capitalist, multiracial utopia here with under the premise that all men are created equal, even though they didn't live up to that, and to a certain extent we haven't lived up to it now, right? They hang that over your head as that's the American ideal, right? That's what you know uh Barack Obama, what does he have? A book coming out called something like The Promised Land or something like that. And he always talks about the promise of America, that we work and we chip away at perfecting the union to fully realize this idea that all men are created equal, right? We always have this ideal. It's somewhere off in the distance that someday we'll reach the promised land where we can all get along. And as long as we strive towards that as an ideal, then we can keep this charade going where as long as we work towards recognizing each other's humanity, we can keep this little oligarchy going where, while the masses are struggling to get along with each other, and sometimes they don't, sometimes they do. We have moments where Donald Trump gets elected. We have moments where Barack Obama gets elected. Sometimes it's inspiring, sometimes it's depressing. But through it all, this system of like I said, this oligarchic system just remains a constant.
Mhm.
And that was the plan all along, as far as I know. And so the catch 22 is you ask, okay, well, is it possible to have a sort of democratic socialist system when you have people of all different racial and ethnic backgrounds? Good question, fair question, right? But on the other hand, you say the only way to have a multiracial, multicultural utopia is to have some form of democratic socialism,
Sure.
right? Because you
Sure.
can't actually unite people unless they feel a material um, interest, unless they have a material incentive to actually be united. And
Mhm.
this is the false promise of the Obamas of the world, is they say we can unite people behind an ideal that's so abstract that there's no material benefit to anyone, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Right.
we can all just get along. But if you're not incentivizing that with saying, yeah, we're all going to get along because we're all going to pay for each other's healthcare. In the UK, they take pride in the fact that they pay for each other's healthcare when they get sick. They don't bitch about, oh, I'll work my ass off and you sit there on the couch. I got to pay for your healthcare. That's not a thing. It's not a thing, right? Now, you could say maybe that's because they are a racially sort of homogeneous society. But the flip side of
That
that is the
that's
only
that's
way
the
you
question.
create. But the flip side of that, I mean, I'm saying this a second time, right? Is that the only way you can actually create the kind of harmony, is to invest in the common good, to make people feel like they are invested in each other's well-being. And you can't
Uh,
do that with this hyper-capitalist system that we've built.
well,
And
sure. I mean, I don't know if you saw on our page after the discussion you put up on YouTube yesterday. Somebody asked if due dissidents believes in reparations, and I didn't speak for you. I said, for me personally, I think an elegant solution would be, okay, if you're slave descendant, not if you're an immigrant from the Caribbean or Africa, like if you're actually descended from American slavery, no income taxes for 100 years, not state, not local, not federal, none. That's the
yeah,
easiest
I think
way to
that
do.
makes sense.
I think that's the easiest way, and it would probably have the least resistance because it doesn't involve proactively sending monthly checks, which will encourage the whole welfare queen
Right,
stuff from
exactly.
that from
That's
that.
the thing. That's the thing. But look, I mean, look, I did see that question, and I mean, look, in principle, yes, I am for reparations. Sure. I mean,
Well, that's
if your
that I'm
grandfather
for
was
it. It do it
in
that
that
way.
way, sure. No, but
Do it like that.
I'm just saying in spirit, right? Let's say we didn't have to worry about like the political ramifications of it or
Oh
people
yeah,
getting
yeah,
upset.
yeah. Sure,
In
sure.
spirit, like, look,
Yeah.
if your grandfather came here from Sicily and opened a little, shoemaking shop in Lower Manhattan, people brag about this all the time. My grandfather came here with a nickel in his
Mhm,
pocket, didn't speak a word of English, and he built a life for himself, and that allowed my father to build a life for himself, which allowed
mhm.
me to build a life for myself. Well, if your great grandfather was a slave, they came here and worked their ass off and got nothing for it. Absolutely not. They didn't build any capital from that labor. So it's a debt that's owed. So I'm with it in
Mm,
that sense. I
sure.
do agree with you that in this country right now, it would be impossible to do it the way that you really have to do it. You would have a new civil war in this country if you tried to do it that way. So yeah, I think the income tax thing is actually a pretty good idea.
It's
But once again,
it,
but you can't even go there until you solve this underlying problem that people
right.
are not invested in their own well-being. You can't do that until you can't even touch that until you have Medicare for all. You can't even touch that until you have tuition-free college.
You're right.
Because even
Because
the solution
people
you're
have to
talking about,
feel people cannot be as angry and deprived as they are right now.
right, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
They have to at least feel that their basic needs are being taken care of before they're going to be open to justice.